She's pretending. Nothing's wrong with her. She just wants attention, my daughter's husband said loudly, as if the whole hospital ward needed to hear it. I lay there in that stiff white bed, chest sore, heart heavier than the 4-bag dripping beside me. My daughter didn't say a word. She just looked away. I used to be their hero, their protector. Now, I was just a burden with a heartbeat. The nurses stared. The other families whispered. But I didn't flinch. I reached into my purse and handed him my lawyer's card. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. It wasn't always like this. The beep of the heart monitor pulsed like a slow clock, ticking away the silence of my hospital room. White walls, white sheets, white light. Everything was too clean, too sterile, except for the way I felt inside. Empty. Forgotten. They hadn't come back since that day. It had been 3 days. No calls. No texts. Not even a message passed along through a nurse. I watched the nurses wheel in warm meals 3 times a day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Each one untouched. Not because I wasn't hungry, but because nothing tasted right when you're waiting for someone who never shows up. The nurse with the kind eyes, Melissa, I think her name was, placed a tray beside me gently that morning. Still no visitors, hon? She asked, her voice soft like she already knew the answer. I gave a weak smile and shook my head. She reached over, adjusted the blanket over my legs and whispered, "You're stronger than you think." She didn't know how much I needed that. I turned to look at the chair next to my bed. The same one where a husband would sit, holding his wife's hand. Or a son, leaning in with a warm coffee and a joke to make her laugh. But my chair? It stayed cold. Empty. Waiting. My daughter used to sit there. Years ago. When she had her first heartbreak, she curled into my lap and cried for hours. That same girl now pretended I was invisible. And my son, he hadn't even called. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he did and chose not to care. I wasn't sure which version hurt more. The pain in my chest wasn't just medical. It was layered, compressed. The ache of birthdays spent alone, of phone calls never returned, of holidays where my invitation came as an afterthought, if at all. 3 nights ago when they accused me of faking, I didn't argue. What would be the point? No one listens when they've already decided who you are. I just looked at the man my daughter married, the man I once welcomed into my home with open arms, and felt something inside me harden. He said I was pretending. But if I was pretending, why did I have to beg for a ride to the hospital? Why did I sleep alone in the ER waiting room, shaking under a thin blanket while my chest pounded like a war drum? I reached over and touched the diary I kept in my purse. It had been with me for decades. Brown leather cover, edges worn and soft from use. Inside it were entries from every stage of my life, from when I first held my children to the last time they held me. I flipped to an old entry, one I wrote when my daughter graduated nursing school. She did it. I don't remember the last time I felt this proud. I sold my ring last month to pay her final tuition, but it was worth every sparkle. I ran my fingers over that line, the ink slightly smudged from the tears I cried the day I wrote it. Back then I thought love was enough. That sacrifice would be remembered. That being a mother, a good mother, meant something. But now love felt like a transaction, one I couldn't afford anymore. The worst part wasn't even the words my son-in-law used. It was how easily my daughter let them sit in the air unchallenged. How her silence screamed louder than his insult. I had been feeling chest pain for days but didn't want to worry anyone. Isn't that what we do? Hide our pain so we don't inconvenience our children? I finally called my daughter after waking up gasping at 2 a.m. She sighed when she answered. Not concern, frustration. "Okay, fine, we'll come," she said. No tenderness. No urgency. They didn't even help me into the car. Just opened the door and waited. Like a burden they were obligated to deliver. I remember thinking, don't cry. Not yet. Not in front of them. I wish I could say the doctor gave me good news. But that would be a lie. My heart was weak. My blood pressure erratic. I needed rest, observation. I needed care. I needed, for once, to not be the one doing all the giving. But when the doctor left, it wasn't concern that filled the room. It was sarcasm. My son-in-law leaned against the wall and smirked. "So this is what gets you attention now?" I looked at my daughter. Nothing. Not even a glance. And then they left. Just left. Said they had a thing and would come back tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. That was 3 days ago. The nurses changed shifts. The sun rose and fell. Machines beeped. My body ached. But the chair remained empty. And I stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible lines, wondering when exactly I stopped being their mother and started being a problem. I thought of a moment long ago. A rainy Sunday afternoon. I'd made grilled cheese and tomato soup. My daughter, 7 years old, in mismatched socks, sat on my lap and said, "You're the best mommy in the world." I remember holding her so tight, as if love could freeze time. But time melted everything. Now she was a woman. And I? Just the woman she used to love. I curled onto my side, hugging my diary, and whispered into the quiet room, "I'm still here. Even if you've already left me." But this wasn't the end of my story. No, this was just the silence before the storm. The house wasn't always this quiet. There was a time when it echoed with laughter. Footsteps running down the stairs. Music playing from my daughter's room, loud enough to shake the frames on the wall. And every evening, the smell of dinner would drift through every corner. Meatloaf, cornbread, or sometimes just scrambled eggs and toast. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And that was more than enough. I remember a night when I found my son asleep on the couch, a book still open in his lap. He was 13. He'd been studying for a science test. I covered him with a blanket, kissed his forehead and whispered, "You're going to do great, baby." No one kisses me goodnight now. Back then, everything I did was for them. I worked long hours at the school, answering phones, managing paperwork, scrubbing cafeteria trays when the janitor called out sick. When my daughter got accepted to nursing school, I cried on the porch for hours. Not because I was sad, but because I didn't know how I was going to afford it. My husband had passed by then. He left me with a house full of memories and a stack of bills. But I promised myself one thing. My children wouldn't suffer. Not if I could help it. So I did what any mother would do. I pawned my jewelry. Sold the wedding ring he gave me on our 10th anniversary. I told myself, it's just a ring. Love doesn't live in diamonds. What a lie. That ring was the last time I felt chosen by someone. But I let it go for her. I remember the day I handed my daughter the last tuition check. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "Mama, I'll pay you back for this. One day I'll take care of you." One day never came. After she graduated, she moved out. Said she needed space. I understood. I even helped her pack. She promised she'd visit every Sunday. First she did. Then every other week. Then holidays. And finally silence. First I didn't mind. I told myself she was busy. That she was building a life. That this was a good thing. But then she started bringing him around, the man she married. The man who laughed at my hand-me-down furniture and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. Can you believe people still use these old things? He never liked my house. Never liked me, I think. He saw me as an obstacle. The woman who reminded his wife of responsibility. Of where she came from. He never called me mom. Not once. She stopped visiting altogether after they got married. And when I called, he'd answer and say, "She's working," or "She's asleep." Even when I could hear her voice in the background. I started writing letters I never sent. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Sometimes warm, sometimes forgotten and cold, and pour my heart into lined pages. I'd tell her about the roses blooming again. About how the porch creaked louder now. About how I missed her voice. Then I'd tuck the letters into my diary. It was safer that way. One summer I slipped and fell in the backyard. Nothing serious, just a sprain. But it scared me. I lay there on the grass for over 30 minutes before I could crawl inside. I called her that night. Told her what happened. There was silence. Then, "Okay, well, be careful next time. I'm really swamped at work right now." That was it. No visit. No offer to come by. Just a warning to not fall again. The next morning I opened my diary and wrote, "Love should feel warm. Why does hers feel so cold?" The signs were there. I just refused to see them. Then came last Thanksgiving. I'd spent the entire week preparing. Baked pies. Roasted a turkey. Cleaned the silverware she loved as a child. Set the table for 6, even though I knew it would likely be just me and the TV. But they showed up 3 hours late. My daughter barely made eye contact. Her husband walked in, looked around and said, "Still holding on to all this? Maybe it's time to downsize." He said it like he was giving financial advice. Like he cared. I handed them plates but they didn't touch the food. Said they already ate. She gave me a bottle of lotion and a scented candle. Still in the bag from the store. No card. No hug. I smiled anyway. I told her I loved it. She nodded like a stranger on the street. They stayed for 15 minutes. When they left, my daughter kissed my cheek and said, "We'll talk about that house thing soon. Okay?" I didn't know what she meant at first, but I would soon. That night I sat in the living room with the untouched pie on my lap, fork dangling in my hand. The house felt louder than ever. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the walls, the ticking of a clock I suddenly hated. And for the first time in my life I felt old. Not tired. Not sick. Old. Like something left behind. I still didn't know how far they were willing to go. But I was about to find out. It started with a phone call, short, clipped and overly polite. "Hey Mom," my daughter said, her voice unusually formal. "Do you think we could stop by this weekend? Just want to talk about something." Those words, "talk about something." I'd heard them before. At doctors' offices, in quiet corners of funeral homes, in awkward family meetings where no one wanted to say the real thing out loud. Still I said yes. I always said yes. Because when your children finally want to see you, you don't ask why. You just start tidying up the living room. That Saturday I baked banana bread. The kind she used to beg me to make when she was 9, licking the bowl clean with sticky fingers. I made a fresh pot of coffee, set out the good plates. Wore my softest cardigan. The blue one my son once said made me look like the sky. They arrived late. Of course. She barely made eye contact when she walked in. He didn't take off his shoes. Instead, he stepped across my clean floor like he owned it, glancing at the curtains, the walls, the furniture, appraising everything like a realtor, not a son-in-law. "We won't stay long," he said before I could offer coffee. I gestured to the table, tried to smile. "Just made banana bread. Still warm." He didn't sit. Just leaned against the doorframe like he had something more important waiting for him. My daughter looked uncomfortable. Or maybe just disinterested. She finally said it, flat and rehearsed. "We've been thinking, Mom. This house is a lot for you. Too much space. Too much maintenance." I blinked. "I'm fine here. Been here over 40 years. "That's the point." Her husband cut in louder. "You're old. Things happen. What if you fall again? You were lucky last time." Lucky. He made it sound like surviving was an inconvenience. "We looked into options," she continued, sliding a pamphlet across the table. "There's a lovely place near the lake. Assisted living. They have a garden." I looked at the glossy paper. Smiling old people playing cards. A man holding a tiny cup of applesauce. My daughter had signed her name at the bottom already. My hands trembled as I picked up the paper. I wasn't just being asked to move. I was being signed away. "I built this house," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted. "Every tile. Every corner. Your father and I." "I know, Mom," she said quickly, like she was brushing off a grocery list. "But it's time to let go. You said you felt lonely. You'd have company there." Company. I wanted my family. Then came the final blow. Her husband pulled something from his pocket. A printed email. "This is the market estimate. The place could sell for a good price. It makes sense to cash out now while the value's up." Cash out. That's what I'd become. An asset. A line item. I stared at the paper, then at them. My own child, nodding as he spoke. My baby girl, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Now selling off my life like it was a garage sale. "I'm not ready to leave my home," I said slowly. Her husband scoffed. "Come on. Don't be difficult." "Difficult?" I asked. "You can't live here forever. We're trying to help you. You think we want to deal with this stuff?" That word "deal" stayed in the air like smoke. I wanted to scream. Throw the banana bread across the room. Cry, beg, plead. But I didn't. I just stood up, walked over to the cabinet, and poured myself a cup of coffee. My hand was shaking so badly I spilled a little on the counter. No one moved to help. I took a sip. It was cold. Of course it was. I turned around, leaned against the sink and said, "Why now?" He shrugged. "You're not getting any younger." "And my daughter?" She looked down at her hands. Didn't say a word. Didn't defend me. Didn't stop him. That silence told me everything. She wasn't trapped. She wasn't confused. She had chosen. Not me. Him. I was never part of the plan. I was the obstacle. They left not long after. Said they'd give me time to think. He took the banana bread wrapped in foil without asking. My daughter gave me a hug that felt more like a handshake. The front door shut. The house was quiet again. But something inside me was screaming. I walked to the hallway to the closet where I kept old boxes. Pulled out the folder with our deed. Our insurance papers. The original mortgage paid off in full. All in my name. I held them in my hands and whispered, "You want to take my home?" Not without a fight. But I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I'd fight them the only way I had left, with silence, and a signature they'd never see coming. I didn't hear from them for weeks after that conversation. Not a call. Not a visit. Not even a holiday card. At first, I told myself they were giving me time to cool down, to reconsider the reasonable offer they'd put on the table. But deep down I knew better. They weren't waiting. They were plotting. One evening I went out to check the mailbox. Just bills and a glossy flyer for a new real estate firm. I was about to throw it away when something caught my eye, the agent's name. It was the same one printed on the market estimate my son-in-law handed me weeks ago. I paused. Opened the flyer. It listed recently evaluated properties in your area. My address was on it. They hadn't just considered the idea. They had already started the process. I stood on the porch, the wind tugging at my sweater, gripping that flyer like a confession. It felt like I'd been stabbed in the back. Not with a knife but with a pen and clipboard. I wasn't even sick enough to die. And yet they were making plans for my after. 2 days later, a woman knocked on my door. Mid-30s, sharp smile, leather folder in hand. "Hi. I'm Jenna from Pinewood Realty. Just following up on the conversation with your daughter and son-in-law. I'd love to set a date to walk the property with my team." I blinked. "Excuse me." She tilted her head, confused. "Oh, they didn't mention it? They said you were considering putting the home on the market. We have 3 interested buyers already." My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't yell. Didn't slam the door. I simply said, "This house isn't for sale." She frowned, forced another smile, and handed me a card. "Well, if you change your mind." When she left, I sat in the kitchen. The same table where my children once did homework, where my daughter spilled grape juice on her report card and cried for an hour. The same table they were now trying to wipe away with a real estate transaction. The next day I had a checkup scheduled. A routine follow-up for my heart. I didn't ask either of them to take me. I took a cab. But they showed up anyway. I was sitting in the waiting area, clutching my coat when I heard his voice first, that familiar mocking tone. "You sure you need this appointment? You seem fine to me." I didn't turn around. They sat beside me like everything was normal. My daughter gave me a little wave. "Hey Mom. We thought we'd just be here. Support you." Support? The same woman who offered to hand me off to strangers with bingo nights and hallway call buttons? The receptionist called my name. I stood up, nodded politely and walked past them. The appointment was short. My blood pressure was elevated. The doctor warned me to avoid stress. I laughed genuinely and told him, "I'll try." When I stepped out, they were still in the waiting area. My daughter's husband stood and stretched, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "So what's the verdict? Is she dying or just being dramatic?" People turned. Nurses. Other patients. An old man across the room looked at me and frowned. I felt every stare. Every judgment. Like I was some manipulative old woman pretending to be sick for attention. My cheeks burned. My throat tightened. My knees trembled, not from illness but from humiliation. I looked at my daughter. Again she said nothing. Just lowered her eyes. I took a deep breath, walked to the front desk, and asked to speak to the nurse in private. In the hallway, I pulled a business card from my purse and asked, "Can I use your copier?" The nurse blinked, then nodded. I slid the card onto the glass. Copied it twice. One for me. One for him. I walked back to the waiting area. Head high, eyes forward. My daughter's husband was scrolling through his phone. I handed him the card without a word. He looked at it confused. What's this? My lawyer, I said. In case you decide to schedule another open house behind my back. His jaw tightened. You're being ridiculous. No, I said, still calm. I'm being prepared. I turned to my daughter. She wouldn't meet my gaze. I hope a part of her felt ashamed. I left them there. Didn't look back. That night I made myself tea. It sat on the table for hours untouched. Just like me. I opened my diary and wrote, "The children I raised are gone. In their place are strangers with hungry eyes." I underlined that sentence twice. What would you do if your own child's spouse called you a liar in front of strangers, and your child said nothing? 'Cause I didn't just feel hurt. I felt erased. But I was done waiting for them to change. It was time for me to change the game. The strange thing about heartbreak is how quiet it is. There's no thunderclap. No dramatic violin in the background. Just silence. Heavy, thick, unbearable silence that settles in your chest like wet cement. That night after the hospital visit, I didn't turn on the lights when I came home. I walked into the kitchen by memory, dropped my purse onto the table, and stared at the cold cup of tea still sitting from that morning. Unfinished. Like me. The house creaked as it always did, the old wood complaining under its own age. But tonight it felt louder. Like it was reminding me of every year I had spent here alone. I didn't eat dinner. I didn't even take off my coat. I just stood there looking out the kitchen window, watching the wind move the empty swing in the backyard. The same swing my daughter used to beg me to push one more time when she was 5. One more time, I whispered to myself. But there were no more times left. I sat in the living room, knees aching, hands in my lap, and realized something. I wasn't tired from aging. I was tired from being forgotten. I had spent my entire life trying to make others comfortable. Making sure everyone was fed before I ate, that everyone else had gifts under the tree even when I didn't, that birthdays were celebrated, homework was helped with, scraped knees were kissed, and hearts were mended. But who did that for me? Who saw me? The children I loved with everything I had, now made plans to erase me like I was a mistake. I thought of that moment in the hospital waiting room. His voice cruel and careless. Her silence sharp and cowardly. I felt a pressure in my chest again. Different this time. Not medical. Emotional. A grief that comes from knowing no one is coming for you. Not because they can't, but because they won't. I curled into the corner of the couch, clutching my diary to my chest like a life vest. If I closed my eyes, I could almost hear their younger voices. Little feet pounding down the hall. Giggles. Mommy, look. Every 5 seconds. Now. Nothing. I opened the diary to the middle. My handwriting, once neat and hopeful, had grown smaller over the years. A note from 10 years ago caught my eye. If I disappear, would they even notice? Tears blurred the ink. I whispered out loud, "I'm not dead. I'm still here. I'm still me." But the room didn't answer back. I got up slowly and made my way to the hallway mirror. Looked at the woman standing there. Eyes dull. Hair more silver than brown. Wrinkles etched deep, not just from age, but from being unappreciated. And I said the words I'd never dared say before. I'm not nothing. The next morning I woke up sore from the couch. I didn't have the energy to climb the stairs the night before. I moved through the house like a ghost, heating up stale coffee and forcing a few sips down my throat. I didn't expect anyone to visit. But I hoped. Hope is a stubborn thing. Midday the phone rang. I stared at it for a long time before answering. It was my son. I heard what happened at the hospital, he said, voice stiff. Sarah told me. Did she tell you what he said? A pause. She said it was a misunderstanding. I closed my eyes. Of course, he added. They're worried about you. That's all. It's not about money or anything. I almost laughed. They have a real funny way of showing worry. Plotting my move while I'm still alive? Having realtors knock on my door before my tea's even cooled. He didn't respond. Do you believe I'm faking it? I asked. No, he said quickly. No, Mom. I don't. That mattered more than I expected it to. But not enough. I'm not asking for their money, I said. I'm not asking for care. I'm asking for basic dignity. Silence again. I'll check in soon, he said. I have to go. The line went dead. I stood there, phone still in hand, thinking about all the times I left work early to pick him up when he had a cold. All the chicken soup. All the bedtime stories. The hundreds of ways I said, I love you without ever needing the words. I poured the rest of the coffee down the sink. Then I pulled out the lawyer's card. The time for hoping was over. I called the number. A kind voice answered. Ms. Lambert's office, how can we help you? I cleared my throat. I'd like to make an appointment. What's it regarding? I stared out the window. My will. If they were so eager to plan my ending, they'd now get one they never expected. The lawyer's office was colder than I expected. Not in temperature but in feeling. Gray walls, soft leather chairs, a glass bowl of peppermints no one touched. A place where endings were written in polite voices and stamped in ink. But I wasn't there to end anything. I was there to begin again. A young woman in a navy suit welcomed me. Ms. Lambert will be with you shortly. She smiled gently, probably assuming I was there to settle a husband's estate. Or arrange hospice plans. Old women didn't usually walk in with fire behind their eyes. But that's exactly what I carried with me. Fire and a manila folder. Inside that folder were the documents I'd been collecting since the night they tried to erase me. The deed to my house, insurance papers, old photos of my family in the yard, proof of everything I built with my bare hands. And on top of that stack, a note I'd handwritten the night before. My life was never an asset. It was a gift, one they refused to cherish. When Ms. Lambert called my name, I stood steadier than I'd felt in weeks. She greeted me kindly, led me into a quiet office, and gestured to the chair across from her desk. So, she began, folding her hands, what can I help you with today? I looked her straight in the eye and said, I want to rewrite my will. She blinked. Of course. And, you want to make changes to the current beneficiaries? I nodded. My children are in it now, I said. But they won't be for much longer. She didn't ask why. Just gave a slow, respectful nod, like she'd seen this before. Maybe not the same story but the same pain. I explained everything. Not just the legal parts but the emotional ones, the hospital insult, the ignored birthdays, the attempts to sell my home like I was already dead. I spoke slowly, deliberately, not because I was unsure but because I wanted every word to matter. She listened. Took notes. Didn't interrupt once. When I finished, I opened the folder and pulled out the final document. One I'd typed the night before on my old laptop. It was a letter. Not to my children. To the women. The women who came through the shelter downtown. The same one I used to volunteer at before my arthritis made scrubbing floors too difficult. Women abandoned by their families. Left behind in their old age. Sound familiar? I wanted my house to go to them. I wanted it to become a place of healing, not just for me but for others like me. Ms. Lambert read the letter. When she looked up, her eyes were glossy. You're sure? She asked gently. Absolutely, I said. They won't miss what they never valued. We drafted the new will together. Every clause, every name, every stipulation. My children were removed. The property, the savings, even my old jewelry, all of it would go elsewhere. To someone who might actually treasure it. I signed it with a steady hand. The pen didn't tremble once. That night, I sat in my bedroom, the same one where I'd once held my children during thunderstorms, whispered lullabies into sweaty hair, and prayed I was doing enough. I pulled out an old photo album. The leather was cracked, the corners bent from years of use. On the first page was a picture of me and my late husband, standing in front of this very house. I was holding our daughter, just a toddler in pigtails. He had one hand on my shoulder, the other resting on the porch railing he built himself. We looked full, whole, like everything ahead of us was bright. I traced his face with my fingertip. He'd be proud of me. He was always the one who reminded me, you're stronger than you think. I hadn't believed him then, but I did now. Because for the first time in years I wasn't just surviving. I was choosing. A few days later I got a call from the shelter. We received your letter, the woman on the line said. Her voice cracked halfway through. Are you sure you want to do this? I'm sure, I said. But I'd like to be involved, to help turn it into something warm. Not just bricks and walls. A home. She told me they'd love that. That the other women would love that. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something I hadn't felt since my children were small. Needed. They thought I had nothing left. But they forgot something important. This house was mine. And I wasn't done using it yet. They came back one Sunday afternoon, unannounced. I was pruning the roses in the front yard, trying to ignore the pain in my knees, when I saw their car pull into the driveway. Shiny. Black. Loud music bleeding from the windows. He parked crooked. His usual way of arriving like he owned the place. She stepped out in oversized sunglasses and a tight smile. He followed behind, already checking his phone. I didn't greet them. I just stood there with my gloves on, shears in hand, dirt still under my nails. "Mom," my daughter said, walking up the steps. "We thought we'd check in. We were in the area." "In the area?" I nodded. "Come in then." I didn't offer coffee. I didn't take off my gardening gloves. I just led them into the house like guests I didn't plan to keep. They sat on the couch, the one with the floral print my daughter used to spill cereal on as a child. Now she looked at it like it was too old, too worn to me. He got straight to the point. "We've been thinking. It might be time to list the house. The market's going down. We don't want to miss the opportunity." I looked at him. "We don't." He smirked. "You, of course. Just trying to help." My daughter cleared her throat. "We can get a great price now, Mom. You could have a nice room at Lakeside. No upkeep. No stress." I almost laughed. Lakeside. The place where I'd be just another forgotten woman in a hallway of beige walls and plastic flowers. "I'm not interested," I said simply. She blinked. "Why not? You told me you were feeling isolated." "I told you I was lonely," I snapped, voice low. "Not desperate." Her husband stood, pacing now. "You're being emotional. This is the practical thing to do. You don't need all this space." I rose to my feet, still wearing my gloves, still covered in dirt and thorns. "And you don't get to decide what I need." He scoffed. "We're just looking out for your future." "No," I said. "You're looking out for my house." And then it happened. He looked me square in the eye, chuckled and said, "You should be thanking us. Most old women don't get this kind of help." I felt it then, that moment. The moment something inside you snaps, not like glass, but like rope stretched too tight for too long. The last strand had broken. My daughter looked at me, uncertain. Maybe she felt it too. Maybe a flicker of guilt tried to make its way through her perfectly powdered face. But it was too late. I reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out the thick envelope. "This," I said, "is the updated deed. You're no longer listed. Neither of you." My daughter's face went pale. He stepped forward. "You're joking." I handed him a copy. "You think this house is some forgotten crown to be passed down. But this home is not an inheritance. It's a memory. And you stopped earning your place in it the day you made me feel like I was already gone." He opened the folder, eyes scanning. "You left it to a shelter?" I nodded. "To women like me. Women who were good to their families and got forgotten anyway." "You can't be serious," he said. "I've never been more serious." He threw the folder down on the table, looked to my daughter. "Say something." She didn't. Her hands were shaking. I stepped closer. Not angry. Not loud. Just clear. "Do you know how many nights I stayed awake while you were sick with fever? How many shoes I patched so you wouldn't go to school embarrassed? I didn't do those things expecting payback. But I didn't do them to be discarded either." He pointed a finger. "You're being spiteful." "No," I said, pulling off my gloves. "I'm being fair." Then I picked up the envelope and walked to the fireplace. Lit a match. And one by one, I burned the old market estimates, the realtor's flyer, and the pamphlet from Lakeside into ash. He didn't say another word. But as they left, him fuming, my daughter nearly in tears, I felt no guilt. Only peace. That night, I sat in my favorite chair near the window. The same chair no one ever sat in with me anymore. Outside it was starting to rain, gentle, cleansing. The kind of rain that smells like new beginnings. I poured myself a cup of tea. This time I drank it warm. I opened my diary and wrote. They took my silence for weakness. But silence was my weapon. And now they'll hear it in every unopened door. They thought it was over. But I hadn't even told them about the letter yet. They showed up again a week later. This time not with words but with paperwork. I heard the knock at the door just after breakfast. The kind of knock that isn't a question but a demand. I already knew who it was. I didn't rush. I let them wait. When I finally opened the door, they were both standing there, my daughter and her husband, dressed too formally for a casual visit. His tie was crooked. Her makeup looked tired. A manila folder sat clutched in his hand like a weapon. "May we come in?" my daughter asked. I stepped aside but didn't offer seats. He didn't waste time. He pulled out the folder, placed it on the kitchen table, and spread the papers like a dealer at a bad poker game. "A transfer of property," he announced. "Clean. Simple. You'll get to stay at Lakeside with all expenses covered. The house moves into our name for management. Everyone wins." I looked at the papers, then at my daughter. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Management?" I asked. He shrugged. "Let's be honest. You're not in a position to handle all this anymore. You've had episodes. The hospital visit. And now this sudden change to your will." I smiled faintly. "So you did find out." He leaned forward. "We spoke to your lawyer's office. They wouldn't share details, but word gets around." My daughter whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You didn't ask," I said. "You assumed." She looked like she might cry, but I wasn't sure if it was guilt or inconvenience. He tapped the paper. "Just sign it. It makes everything easier." I walked to the counter, picked up a teacup, filled it with water from the kettle. Steam curled into the air. I took a slow sip. "I already told you," I said, facing them. "This house is not for sale." "You're being cruel," he snapped. "You're ruining your daughter's future over spite." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you call her standing silent while you mocked me in a hospital waiting room? Spite." He straightened up. "We've done so much for you." "What?" I asked. "What exactly have you done?" His jaw clenched. "Forget it." My daughter finally spoke, voice trembling. "Mama, we didn't mean to hurt you. We just thought." "You thought I wouldn't notice," I interrupted. "You thought I was old enough to be manipulated, but not sharp enough to see through it." She looked up, startled. "You forgot I changed your diapers," I said softly. "Taught you how to hold a spoon. Held you after every heartbreak. And you let him treat me like a burden." I reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope, set it on top of the papers. "What's that?" her husband asked. "Something you'll want to read," I said. He opened it. A letter. My handwriting. He read the first line out loud. "To the man who married my daughter, you may have won her heart, but you'll never own mine." His hands trembled as he read the rest silently. In that letter I told the truth. Everything. How I'd watched him slowly isolate her. How I forgave the cold glances, the controlling remarks. How I ignored his smirks when he walked through my home as if it were already his. And how, despite all of that, I still hoped she would choose me. Not for money. Not for property. But for love. I saw her lips move as she read over his shoulder. Her eyes welled. He dropped the letter on the table. "This changes nothing legally." "No," I said calmly. "But it changes everything else." There was a knock at the door again. He flinched. I walked over, opened it and stepped aside. Ms. Lambert entered. My lawyer. In her suit and with her briefcase. "I thought it would be easier if we were all in the same room," I said. Ms. Lambert opened her files and laid out the certified will, notarized documents, and the property deed. "This house," she said firmly, "is no longer part of any family inheritance. It has been legally transferred to the Willow Foundation." My daughter gasped. He exploded. "You're giving it to strangers?" "No," I replied. "To women who won't roll their eyes when I speak. Who won't treat my presence like clutter." "She's not in her right mind," he muttered. She's bitter." Ms. Lambert calmly handed him a psychiatric evaluation. "Fully competent, evaluated 2 weeks ago." My daughter's hand flew to her mouth. I looked at her one last time. "I gave you everything," I said. "But I won't give you what's left of me. Would you give your children another chance, after they stood by while you were humiliated? Because love can be unconditional, but respect should never be." They left that day, faces pale, voices shaking. But it was what happened the following week that none of us saw coming. The house was quieter than ever. But this time the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like a boundary, a protective wall I had built, not out of bricks but of choices, deliberate, difficult choices that said, "This is where your power over me ends." For 3 days after the confrontation, I heard nothing from them. No apology. No phone call. Not even a half-hearted text. I thought I would feel hollow, grief-stricken. But what I felt instead was clarity. There was a freedom in finally saying no. In drawing the line not just in sand but in signed legal documents and sealed envelopes. A lifetime of being agreeable had left me bent over backwards. Now I was standing straight. On the 4th morning the doorbell rang. It wasn't them. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Felder. The one with the twin poodles and the gossip radar sharper than any satellite dish. "I heard there was a commotion here the other day," she said, stepping inside uninvited as always. I nodded. "Family talk." She raised her eyebrows. "Sounded like more than that. Your son-in-law practically peeled out of your driveway like he was in a race." I smiled. "He lost." She paused, looking around the house. "You okay?" I nodded. "Better than I've been in years." And I meant it. She stayed for tea, real tea, warm and shared. And I told her what I hadn't told anyone else. The plan for the house, the shelter, the letter. By the time she left, she hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. "You did something brave," she whispered. I didn't feel brave. I just felt done. Later that afternoon I was in the backyard, clipping deadheads off my rose bushes, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It was my son. Alone. No suit. No tie. No scripted reason for being there. Just him, in jeans and a windbreaker, his hair tousled by the breeze. "Hi, Mom," he said. I blinked. "Didn't expect to see you." He nodded. Hands in his pockets. "Can I come in?" We sat in the kitchen. He didn't look at me for a long while. Just stared at the same spot on the table where I used to place his after-school snack. "I should have come sooner," he said finally. "I heard about what happened." "Which part?" I asked. He let out a breath. "All of it." I said nothing. "I didn't know they were pushing you like that," he continued. "I should have protected you. You didn't want to get involved. I thought it would pass." I shook my head. "Things like this don't pass. They build." He nodded. "You're right." We sat in silence. Not awkward, not angry. Just full. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "I saw the will." I raised my eyes to his. "And?" He smiled sadly. "I don't blame you." I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until I exhaled. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. A crumpled old print. It was us. Him as a boy, sitting on my lap, missing a front tooth and holding up a trophy from his spelling bee. I remembered that day. He had been so nervous, and I promised him he could skip chores if he spelled every word right. He had. "You always showed up," he said. I nodded. "I still would." He looked at me. "I didn't marry someone who respects you, and I let her change how I treated you. I can't take that back. But I'm sorry." My throat tightened. "I forgive you," I said. "But I'm not changing the will." He smiled again. "I didn't come for that." And for the first time in years I believed him. Later that evening, I received a text from my daughter. Just 3 words. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, then placed the phone down. Not because I wanted revenge, but because some bridges aren't burned by rage. They crumble under the weight of repeated disappointment. I wasn't sure if I'd ever answer her again, but fate had one last twist waiting. That night, I sat by the window with the lamp turned low, the rain tapping gently against the glass like it had something to say but didn't want to wake the house. In front of me lay the photo album I hadn't opened in years. I flipped it open slowly, the pages crackling like dry leaves. There we were, all of us, frozen in time. Birthdays, scraped knees, Christmas mornings in flannel pajamas. One photo caught my breath. My daughter, no more than 8, her arms wrapped tightly around my neck, smiling wide with icing on her cheek. I was kneeling beside her, proud and messy from baking her cake. I touched the photo and whispered, "Where did you go?" But I wasn't speaking to the girl in the picture. I was speaking to the woman who let me be humiliated in a hospital waiting room and called it love. I flipped further to a picture of my late husband and me. We were standing in front of this very house, his arm around my shoulders, a hammer in his other hand. We just finished building the back fence. That day he kissed my forehead and said, "As long as you have this place, no one can push you out." He was right. I closed the album and reached for my diary. Not to write, just to hold. The weight of it grounded me. Every page was a memory, a confession, a sacrifice logged in ink, a mother's silent account of everything she gave, and everything she lost. I thought about the plan I'd put in place. The will, the letter, the property transfer, and now something more. Because I didn't just want justice. I wanted meaning. I wanted my story to be more than an ending. I wanted it to be a beginning, not just for the women I was helping but for me. So I got to work. The next morning I called the Willow Foundation again. Told them I wanted to do more than donate the house. I wanted to transform it before I handed over the keys. Into what? The director asked. A place that feels like healing, I said. Warm lights. Real beds. A kitchen with the smell of hope. She chuckled, soft and surprised. We've never had someone offer that before. I've never had the chance to give this way before, I replied. I started packing the things I didn't need. The china set my daughter always criticized. The gold-rimmed mirror my son-in-law said made the hallway look old. All of it gone. In their place I unpacked simpler things. A handmade quilt, the tea kettle I used every winter, the old radio that still played gospel music on Sunday mornings. I cleaned every corner myself, even when my back ached and my legs begged me to stop. Because every sweep of the broom felt like reclaiming something. Not just space, dignity. I invited the foundation director to tour the house. She walked slowly, quietly, pausing in every room. In the kitchen she stopped by the window and said, "You can feel it." Feel what? I asked. Peace. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear that. Later that week, I received a second text from my daughter. "I didn't know how much I hurt you. I see it now. Please let me talk to you. Even just once." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry. Because I wasn't ready to open a door that had taken me so long to close. Instead I sat down and wrote a new letter. Not to her. Not to her husband. But to the women who would one day walk through this home's front door. To whoever sleeps in this room first. I built this house with love. I hope you feel it in the floors, the walls, the warmth of the kitchen. This was once a place where my family grew. And now it will be a place where you heal. You are not forgotten. You are not a burden. You are a woman who matters. I folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer of what used to be my daughter's childhood dresser. I stepped back, took a breath, and smiled. The house was ready. The papers were signed. But before I could hand over the keys, there was one last envelope to deliver. The morning of the handover, I woke before the sun. It was still dark when I brewed my tea, strong black, the way my husband used to make it. I sat at the kitchen table, steam rising in the golden light of the stove's hood lamp, and looked around the room one last time. It looked beautiful. Not in a magazine way. Not staged or perfect. But lived in. Worn floors that had seen tiny feet running, angry feet stomping, tired feet pacing. Walls that had heard lullabies, arguments, and prayers whispered through tears. And now it would witness something new, healing. The Willow Foundation van pulled into the driveway just after 8. 3 women stepped out. None of them spoke right away. They just stood in the front yard, looking up at the house like they were afraid it might vanish if they blinked too long. I opened the door. "Come in," I said, smiling. They entered slowly, reverently, as if stepping into a sacred place. One woman, Clara, I later learned, touched the banister at the staircase and whispered, "It smells like cinnamon." I laughed. "That's probably from the baked apples I made last night." Another, Marcia, stopped at the fireplace and said, "I haven't seen a real wood-burning one since I was a kid." "I used to keep it lit all winter," I said, "even when the heat worked just fine." They wandered the house like it was a museum of things long lost, warmth, quiet, safety. I didn't rush them. In the living room, Clara sat on the couch and started to cry. Not loud. Not ugly. Just soft tears that came without warning. I sat beside her and gently placed a hand over hers. "I didn't just give this house to a charity," I said. "I gave it to women who understand what it feels like to be left behind. Like we're disposable once we stop being useful. She nodded, eyes red. My daughter hasn't called in 3 years. Said I was too much drama. I squeezed her hand. Mine stood by while her husband called me a liar in a hospital waiting room. She looked at me stunned. We didn't need to say more. Pain recognizes pain. And sometimes that's family. We gathered in the kitchen where the foundation director laid out the final documents. I signed the last page with a pen that had once signed birthday cards and school permission slips. Now it signed freedom. When the ink dried, I slid the folder across the table. It's yours now, I said. The director smiled. No. It's theirs. We toasted with coffee. No champagne. No cameras. Just 5 women in a kitchen that smelled like baked apples and second chances. Later that day, I walked through the house one final time. In the upstairs bedroom, I left a box of fresh linens and the letter I'd written. In the bathroom drawer, I left a bottle of rose-scented lotion, the kind my daughter once said was too old ladyish. Maybe one of them would like it. In the laundry room, I left a small framed photo of my husband and me. Not to be remembered, but to bless the house. And on the back porch, I left a folded quilt on the rocking chair. The same chair my daughter used to sit in with a bowl of cherries in her lap, spitting pits into the grass. I touched the armrest, then let it go. As I stepped outside, one of the women handed me a small paper bag. What's this? I asked. Just a thank you, she said. Inside was a handmade candle, lavender scented, and a note. You didn't just give us a home. You gave us proof that we're still worth loving. I didn't cry. Not then. But I felt it. Something warm rising in my chest that no hospital scan could ever detect. That evening, I walked back to the small apartment I'd rented just a few blocks away. It wasn't big. Just a 1-bedroom with creaky floors and an old stove. But it was mine. It was peace. I unpacked slowly, just the essentials. My diary. My photo album. My kettle. A framed picture of my kids when they were still small and their love was loud. I placed it on a shelf. Not to shame them, but to remember what once was. And what still could be. If they ever found their way back. But before I settled in for the night, I had one last thing to do. Deliver a letter that had waited long enough. I stood outside their front door, the letter in my hand, the late afternoon sun dipping low behind me. The light made the gold edges of the envelope glow. It looked warm, gentle, but it carried a finality they weren't expecting. I had debated for days whether to send it by mail or leave it at the door. But some things are meant to be delivered by hand. I rang the bell. It was my daughter who answered. She looked surprised, then nervous. Her eyes darted behind me, maybe checking if I'd brought someone with me. A lawyer perhaps, or a witness. I just came to drop something off, I said. She opened the door wider, uncertain. You want to come in? I shook my head. No. I won't stay. She reached for the envelope slowly, like it might burn her fingers. I didn't let go right away. Before you read this, I said. Know that I'm not writing it out of anger. Or spite. I'm writing it because I have nothing left to say that hasn't already been shown. She nodded, eyes wet. Then I handed her the letter and walked away. I didn't look back. Not when I reached the sidewalk. Not when I crossed the street. Not even when I heard the faint sound of the door closing. Back in my apartment, I sat by the window and watched the shadows stretch across the floor. I thought about what I had written, not every word but the feeling behind it. I hadn't begged. I hadn't blamed. I simply told the truth. Dear Sarah, you were my daughter before you were anything else. Before you became a nurse, before you were a wife, before you wore expensive shoes and forgot how to call. You were the first person I ever loved more than myself. And I would have given you everything. But you mistook that love for a guarantee. That no matter how badly I was treated, I'd stay, I'd give, I'd endure. That's not love. That's erasure. You married a man who saw me as furniture, old, unmovable, in the way. And you stood next to him and said nothing. So I finally chose myself. I gave the house to women who know what it means to be left behind. Not to punish you, but to save myself. You don't have to call. You don't have to explain. Just know that I'm still here. And I'm finally at peace. I never got a reply. Not a phone call. Not a text. Not even a message through my son. But I knew she read it. 2 days later, I received a small card in the mail. No return address. Inside was a note, just one sentence. I hope one day I'm strong enough to do what you did. No name. Just that. I tucked it into my diary, behind the letter I'd written to the women at the shelter. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept all the way through. A week later, my son called. He didn't bring up the letter. He just said, "Want to come over for dinner? Is she going to be there?" I asked. "No," he replied. "Just me. And the kids. They miss you." I went. I brought pie. And when my grandson ran to hug me at the door, I thought, this is what real family looks like. Not blood. Not entitlement. But choice. Effort. Kindness. Tell me, is respect more valuable than inheritance? Because I chose peace over legacy. And in the end, that gave me something no house ever could. But even as the pie cooled on their table, and laughter returned to my ears, I knew the final chapter wasn't over. Not yet. 6 weeks after the handover, I returned to the house, not as its owner but as a guest. I hadn't planned to go back so soon. I thought it might be too hard, too heavy, to walk those familiar halls knowing they no longer belonged to me. But something pulled me there. A soft tug in my chest, like a string still tied to the porch railing my husband once painted sky blue. The front lawn was greener than I remembered. Someone had planted sunflowers by the mailbox. Big, bright, unapologetic things that stood tall despite the wind. Just like I wanted the women inside to feel. I knocked. It wasn't my door anymore. That's why I knocked. A young woman, no more than 25, opened it. She wore an apron dusted with flour and a shy smile. "Miss Marjorie?" I nodded. "They're in the kitchen," she said. "We're baking peach cobbler. Clara's trying to teach me." I stepped inside. The scent hit me first, cinnamon, sugar, something buttery and warm. Then the sound, laughter, soft music playing from the old radio I'd left behind. Someone humming. Felt alive. Not preserved. Transformed. In the kitchen, Clara was peeling peaches while Marcia stirred something in a heavy pot. They looked up and beamed when they saw me. "Look who's back," Clara said, wiping her hands on a towel. "You gave this place your heart," Marcia added. "And now it's got a pulse again." I didn't know I was crying until Clara handed me a tissue. We sat at the table, the same one where my daughter once learned to braid, where my son built science projects, where I ate alone too many times. Now there were teacups. Plates stacked with biscuits. Laughter that didn't ask for permission. "I hope you don't mind," Clara said. "But we've started calling it Marjorie's house." I smiled through tears. "I don't mind." In the living room, a woman read aloud from a paperback while another sewed on the couch. Upstairs, someone was painting a bedroom wall pale yellow. A home was happening. And I hadn't been pushed out. I'd made this happen. Before I left, Clara pulled me aside. "We made something," she said, pressing a small box into my hand. Inside was a key. Not to open doors but to remember. It had been mounted on a wooden plaque, painted soft cream with the words, "She turned her home into hope." I touched it gently. The metal was cool. But my heart was warm. That evening, back in my apartment, I lit the candle they'd once given me. Lavender. Peaceful. I placed the plaque on the bookshelf, next to my diary and the photo of my husband. I imagined him smiling. He would have loved this ending. He always said, "Our house will outlive us if we fill it with love." He was right. I poured a cup of tea. Not because I needed comfort but because I deserved it. This time I drank it hot. And as the rain tapped gently on the window pane, I whispered, "I'm still here." Outro reflection, circular closure. The last time I sat in that kitchen I felt like a ghost. Invisible. Replaced. Now, I'm a legacy. Not in name. Not in blood. But in dignity. They tried to make me disappear. But I made something permanent. A place where women will be seen. Heard. Loved. Marjorie's house lives. And so do I.